Oh, God, we do all of this, Lord, for your kingdom, Lord. We want your kingdom to grow.
Praise the Lord, everybody. I am Pastor Eves. I am the newly elected Pastor Eves. The old Pastor Eves is dead and gone. He is no longer with us. He died in the hospital. I'm just kidding. I know that's not funny, but it is to me. The reason it's kind of funny to me is because I felt like I died in the hospital, very much so, and it is. Well, my iPad isn't working. Am I not connected to the Wi-Fi? Hey, Brother Jared, why don't you come connect me to the Wi-Fi, please? See, I told you I'm not even a part of your church anymore. I can't even get connected to the Wi-Fi. So let me just tell you something here. I'm still the boss. I'm still on the sign. Well, I mean, till y'all's name gets on the sign, you know. See, I did press the button. Tell y'all is something right here, right now. Just because I've had kidney stones don't mean y'all can just like lock me out. I'm just kidding. I've been picking at him. So on a serious note, I want to kind of take a moment here and just explain to you everything that has gone on with me. Over a month ago, we wanted to take care of some kidney stone issues that I've been having for quite a while. And it was supposed to be a one-day procedure where I was in the hospital for one day. They had some complications, some serious complications, so much so that I had 5 surgeries in 30 days. So it was a huge, serious thing that took place. On top of which, I developed an infection with it, and the antibiotics that they have placed me on has attacked my Achilles tendon. So I'm not hardly able to walk as much as I used to be able to. And, I am in pain right now. I can speak to you. It is something that I'm dealing with, and God is on top of it. I believe it. I trust it that I am able to function somewhat normally now, whereas before I was not quite at all. So I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up as to why you haven't seen me in over a month, and what the whoa. And the Lord said, "Let there be light," or sound, or something. So I guess to make a long story short, I do appreciate all the visits into the hospital, the cards that I've received in the mail. Phone calls, text messages. If I have not returned a phone call or a text message, please do not take that personal as to I probably didn't have my phone, which is something that normally is beside me at all times. It has not been during this process. There have been a few emails that I've missed that I just got recently because I've just now started checking email again. I just was not. People that dropped food off at the house, they never saw me because I was upstairs. Couldn't get up and down the stairs very well. I've been on crutches. I'm trying not to be on crutches now because they don't think it's a ruptured tendon because it's still there. So they've put splints in my shoes. They've done several different things. So all of that being said, I just wanted to give you a heads up as to where I have been. We've not sent out one calls, not because we didn't want you to know. I just don't like being a victim at all. I don't want I will tell you everything you want to know if you call me on the phone. I just don't want it all blasted out all over one call, because I don't know, who all hears that one call, whatever, that type of thing. So if you felt like you were not informed enough, that's not on purpose. It's just that I just don't like being a victim, just like you don't like being a victim. How many times have you ever just said, just pray for me, but you didn't want to tell me everything that you wanted me to pray for, right? I'm as human as you are, and just because I'm an employee of this church, I am not your hireling. I'm a God's man, okay? He's my boss. You understand what I'm saying? So I answer to him. Does not mean that, you can't oust me as pastor if I'm not here enough. I mean, there is provisions to do that for your personal legal protection, but I don't think that's the case at all. If you're still behind me in the Sunday school class, why don't you just keep praying for me and tell, and just let me, I thought you were walking out, Sister Alta. You're still behind me. She gets up and starts moving. I'm like, okay, wait a minute here. But oh, yeah, okay, I get that. I understand that. Okay, you haven't seen me in a month, anyways, and so what does it matter? One more Sunday, I mean, I can kind of be a little. I know this is going out over the internet, but I can be a little bit more personable because it's Sunday school. So I thought I would just kind of talk about it now versus in the main worship service. We're going to continue our lessons on the bait of Satan, and I am sorry that it has been a little while since we've got back to it, but I wanted to be the one to teach these lessons and not just let them be taught out there. Not that the other gentlemen couldn't teach the lessons, but I wanted to be the one to teach them. I certainly appreciate everyone that has stepped up to take care of the pulpit while I've not been able to be here. Let's give them a big hand right now. Are you glad to have me back, or you want me to leave? I mean, how many want me to leave? Just raise your hand right now. Okay, Brother Morris, you're the only one that... I'm just kidding, Brother Morris. It was a joke. It was a joke. He did not raise his hand. He was the only one out of sight that I could say that you wouldn't... he's my friend. He's my friend. And I love him to death. So let's get into the bait of Satan here. In the last lesson, I'm going to give it a little bit of an oversight here. We were talking about how someone refused to be offended. It seemed like he had the right. Joseph had the right to be offended. How many remember that lesson on Joseph, right? He had the right to be offended, but he chose not to be offended. So today we're going to talk about the man after God's own heart, that being David, as well as a few others here. David also had opportunities to be offended. When King Saul, his father-in-law, tried everything he could to offend David, even though David tried everything he could to please Saul. So you see this relationship here where you have a young man trying everything he can do to please his superior, and the superior doing everything he can do to offend his subordinate. It's important for us to see this at this moment, because we live in a world where people don't care if they offend you or not. It's just in the world that we live in. They don't care that what you're going through personally. It's more about them. I was at Costco yesterday getting a new anti-inflammatory for my leg, and I was standing there, and the guy behind the counter at the pharmacy was not even recognizing that I was standing there. He didn't know I was in pain. He had no idea that I'm standing there, and I really couldn't continue to stand there, right? But there's nowhere to sit. So I just keep standing there, and I take a quarter out of my pocket, and I'm just kind of knocking it on the thing like, hey, please recognize that there's somebody standing here. And the longer I'm standing there, the more I'm thinking, you know what, in a few minutes I'm fixing to just say something to let him know. And then I thought to myself, why? I don't know what he's going through. Maybe he's got an out of balance in his registry he's trying to find. I don't know. So I decided not to do anything. Made a choice not to offend. You know, not that I ever do that, by the way, but pain makes you do things that you don't really want to do. You know, when you don't feel good, you tend to be somebody you don't really normally are. And so I decided to choose to beat back Mr. Ronnie Eves that wanted to come back to life and be Pastor Eves and just be there and smile. And, you know, when he finally recognized me to come over, he was the nicest guy. Like the super nicest guy that you would ever want to meet. Like overly friendly. And I thought to myself, if I had offended him, you know, if I had said something to him and messed up his day, I would have never got to really see who he really was. And so I was glad that I didn't. And I'm using that as an example because I'm talking about a millisecond within my brain, you know, as if it was something that I really contemplated. I didn't really contemplate it, but for the purpose of how many times do you just see somebody just fly off the handle? They just fly off the handle. So we got to be careful with that. And so we see this in this particular essence of where David refused to be offended. David was mistreated by the man that he hoped would be his mentor. You know, David was anointed to be king, and he wanted Saul to be his mentor. He wanted Saul to be his mentor. But David refused to allow that to take place. So David kept trying to understand where he had gone wrong, what he had done to turn Saul's heart against him, how he could win it back. He proved his loyalty to Saul he proved his loyalty by sparing Saul's life, is what I meant to say. Saul aggressively pursued to kill David, and David had the opportunity to take his life. And David said this in 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 6 through 7. He said, "And he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master. The Lord's anointed to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David stayed his servants with his words and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way." Now, the part of the story there is that David actually went into this cave where Saul was, and he slipped in and cut the skirt. Well, part of the skirt is part of his prayer shawl, the talit, cut off the corner of the fringe that hung down to prove that he had the opportunity to kill him as a peace offering. Look at what I had the opportunity to do, but I chose not to do it. And it still did not stop Saul from pursuing to kill David. He cried out to Saul with his head bowed to the ground in 1 Samuel 24 and 11. And in the second part of that verse, it says, "Know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in my hand, and I have not sinned against thee." I'm showing you I could have killed you. I cut off the edge of your garment. But I want you to see that in my hand there's no evil against you. Why do you continue to pursue to kill me? You know, this is what David is going through in his mind. Offense, a lot of times, is not personal. It's not something that people mean to personally do. It's either something that they're going through. And the reason why Saul was offended at David and wanted to kill him was not David's fault. He was mad at God. He was mad because the prophet had called him out about something that he had done wrong, and that a new king had been anointed. It didn't mean that God said, you got to quit being king. If he had repented, God would have allowed him to serve his time out, and then David would have taken over. You see, you can't be upset with God because He prepares for the future and you do not. You can't be mad at God because God has got something coming in the future to continue His kingdom and you want to continue it like it is right now. God is going to be God and you have to be you. And we're just chess pieces on His chessboard. Once David knew he had shown his loyalty to his leader, his mind was eased. Later he learned more devastating news. Saul was trying to kill him again. But David refused to raise his hand against one that was seeking his own life. Now, I'm not saying you can't protect yourself, okay? We're living in a world where that's a big, huge debate within even our own political system as to whether or not you have a right to protect yourself. I'm all for you taking the right to protect yourself. If somebody comes in here or into your home and they're meaning you harm, I'm saying you have the right to protect yourself. In this particular situation, it wasn't so much that David was not wanting to protect himself. It was so much more so that he saw that this was a spiritual situation. Okay, so there's a difference between Saul was out to murder David than it was the fact that David simply did not understand why he was coming after him directly. So God even put an army to sleep, okay, and had given him a companion who pleaded for the permission to kill Saul. I mean, God even gave him the opportunity to take out his leader, but as you'll find out later in David's life, God did this several times to David to see if he would disobey the word of the Lord. In this particular situation, David chose to obey the Lord. Later in life, when David was given the opportunity to number the people, the law was you weren't allowed to number them, but he chose to do it anyways. And we're going to talk about choice in the next service specifically, but just giving you an idea, there's one thing this world can never take from you. It's choice. They can't take your choice away from you. They can take everything else from you, but they can't take your power of choice. So David chose not to disobey the Lord. Offense will make excuses to benefit the offended. He could have taken that opportunity to say, look, God opened the door for me to kill him. Not every open door should you walk through. Well, if the door is open, don't walk through every open door. I mean, there's a bar door open for you if you want to go, mess your life up. You don't walk through every open door. So David somehow sensed that this sleeping army served another purpose. It was a test of his heart, and he chose not to do it, so therefore he passed the test. God wanted to see whether David would kill to establish his very own kingdom versus God's kingdom. So after the order of Saul, or just to allow God to establish what God wanted to do. See, if you walk through every open door to establish yourself, if you walk through every open door to make yourself known, look at me, then all you're looking for is establishing your personal kingdom. But if you allow God to orchestrate, then I promise you, through the orchestrating of God, you will see a stronger kingdom that you can serve a part of versus what you can do on your personal self. Romans 12:19, the scripture tells us this. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. It is righteousness for God to avenge his servants. It is unrighteousness for God for servants to avenge themselves. So we have to be careful with the vengeance that's in our mind. Protection, one thing. Vengeance, another. If Saul had jumped in the midst, I'm not saying that David would not have drawn his sword and protected himself if Saul tried to kill him. He would have protected himself. But just to reach out and kill him, that's vengeance. There's a difference, and we have to understand that. So David stood over the sleeping Saul. He faced an important test. The man was asleep. I can solve all my problems right here. What do I do? It would reveal whether David still had a noble heart of a shepherd, whether he would be a man after God's own heart, or if the insecurity that Saul was placing in his life would run his life. Would he remain a God's servant, or would he become his own servant? See, initially it was much easier when we take matters into our own hands instead of waiting for God to move. Hello? You with me? Last week I fought very hard to try to come to church. I wanted to be here. My wife said, "What good is it going to do you if you go and you set yourself back 4 more weeks rather than take another week and try to get your body back into rest?" Well, I come to find out through this week that was really the plan of the Lord. You know, you think, well, why would God not want you to be at church? And I say that sometimes. You know, the Lord willing, I'll see you on Sunday. God's always willing. Sometimes the Lord, there was a time that I had a stomach virus and I wasn't able to go to church, and come to find out there was a shooting right outside of my house that happened at the time I would have been getting in my car. If I had not had the stomach virus, I could have very possibly, or one of my kids could have been shot because we'd have been loading in the car. You don't know how many bullets they fire. I mean, you know, I don't know if you know this or not, but it takes a trained police officer at least 7 rounds to take a perp down. Now, you take someone who's untrained, and they've got a 16-round clip. You see what I'm saying? You've got to, or magazine. Sorry, Brother Fred, I used the wrong word there. Got to get that gun terminology correct, you know. Magazine, clip. It was a clip when I was a kid. It's a magazine now. You know. So you see that. So I don't know how many shots they fired, what they fired. I was in my basement, so I never heard nothing. The only way we found out is the police was knocking on the door. I must have looked like death warmed over when I went to the door, you know, because I didn't hear them. I just heard the dogs upstairs. Then the kids come running down. There's the police at the door, you know. So I'm stumbling up the stairs, you know, to find out what in the world's going on. And hair's like 50 million different directions. And he's like, "Hey, did you hear anything?" I said, "Does it look like I heard anything?" He's like, "Okay, I just want to make sure." I said, what are you talking about anyways? What do you mean, what did I hear anything? He said, "I can't go into it right now." But then you see the police tape across the street, and then you get on the internet. There was a police, or an active shooting situation that took place at 9:15 in the morning on whatever street I lived on. I'm like, what in the world? Because I'd have been getting in the car about that time. So you just never know what God has in store with what situations are taking place in your life. See, God tests you with your obedience. As I mentioned before, he tested David later to see if he would do the same thing, and David fell. He failed the disobedience test. So choice is a matter of whether or not. It's something that you choose to do. He deliberately places us in situations where the standards of religion and society would appear to justify our actions. He allows others, especially those close to us, to encourage us to protect ourselves. We may even think we would be noble to protect others by avenging ourselves, but this is not, and let me say this very loudly and very clearly, this is not God's way. It's not for you to protect yourself. It's for God to protect you. Now, let me make that clear when I say this. I'm not talking about, like I said, if Saul had stepped into the situation and drew his sword, and David would have been very able to protect himself because he's one of God's called people as well. You know, you don't just sit there and drop your hands and let them cut your head off. I don't think that would be the case either. But when it comes to protecting yourself, like trying to take somebody else down so that you look better in everybody else's eyes, that is not what God has called us to do. That is what the bait of Satan is. The bait of Satan is to try always to make yourself look better than the person sitting next to you or the person who is trying to offend you. That's always the bait. You could easily get up in a public crowd when anybody's trying to do you harm and say, well, let me tell you about what that person did. But when you do that, all you're doing is doing exactly what the enemy wants, and that's destroying your own life. You have to be careful with that. So not every open door is for you to walk through. Okay? He allows, it's the way that of God's wisdom to see where you stand and what you're doing. And it's the earthly and the fleshly things. So, one of the things I want to talk about today is, but why does God use corrupt leaders? Now, this is not about the president, but I can say this from a very strong perspective, that if we don't think God's hands are in our political system, we're sadly mistaken. I'm going to tell you straight up that Donald Trump is God's man for the president, just like Obama was God's man for the president. Boy, I know that's a very polarizing thing. But why would you say God's... Because there's probably somebody's going to take this YouTube clip and cut the part where I said Obama was God's man as well and put it out there. See, Pastor Eve said Donald Trump was... You didn't hear me right. I've been under Jimmy Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, 7 presidents. And even though every single one of them were on different aisles of where I stand politically, and I said every single one of them, because I don't agree with all of them in every bit of their politics. I find something with each of them that I agree with and some that I don't agree with. Okay, I want you to understand that. But I've been under 7 presidents, and I can tell you that every single one of them was God's chosen. If you do not think that God is running the political system of this world, you're sadly mistaken. Because God so loved the world. Well, what do you mean? You mean he wants evil to run us? No, it's not the case. But he does allow the devil to think that he's winning so that God wins in the end. That's his strategy. And the devil knows it, but he's just having a good time winning while he can win. I'm just giving you straight up honesty. I mean, if your mom come in there, how many count to 3 with your kids? How many's done that? Raise your hands up high. Don't be ashamed. Okay. Those of you that didn't raise your hand, you probably, I'm not saying that you have to raise your hands. Maria's like, okay, I'll raise my hand. It's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying those of you that don't count to 3, understand where I'm going with this. Either you didn't have kids or you gave them some other type of warning. How many give your kids a warning? If you do that again, I'm going to bust your tail or whatever your form of correction is. You know, maybe it's timeout. Maybe it's I'm going to pull a nose hair. I don't know what it is that you do. You know. Okay. In the corner. Stand in the corner. Time out, put the dunce hat on, whatever the case may be. I'm in church, do not call me. All of that kind of stuff. Sorry, that was my watch, it was ringing. So all of that stuff that takes place in the process of what we're trying to accomplish as it is, if you do that one more time, you give them 3 seconds to continue to disobey. And they take you up to the 2.5 second mark. And then at the 3, they're like, oh, I'm done. And you're like, now if you do that again, and then they go to do it again, I told you, one. You know, you give them 3 more seconds to disobey. You know. They have fun for that 3 seconds. I'm telling you, God's given Satan a certain amount of time just to disobey. And he's having a blast. He knows he's going to go to hell. But if you knew that your eternal life, there was nothing you could do but to burn. There was nothing you could do. Now, you have a choice. He doesn't. If you knew that you had 6,000 years just to ramp and have a blast before you burn for eternity, you're going to spend 6,000 years doing everything you can. And that's what he's doing. And so the Lord is just orchestrating his men to bring us to a place to have revival. See, it's for the church. It's not for whether America gets saved or not. It's for the church. Now, I'm not telling you don't go to the polls and vote your conscience, okay? You do this. You vote your conscience. I don't care who you vote for, you vote. Write Mickey Mouse down for all I care. I don't care. Just go vote. At least you get your voice heard. Well, God's going to put in there who he wants anyway, so might as well not do. That's not, you have a right to at least speak your opinion. Just as God had his political hand in Israel back then, Saul was his chosen. But he ended up being evil. Do you think God didn't know that Saul was going to be evil? He knew it, but he still chose him. So why does God put us under leaders who make mistakes? Well, number one, leaders are human. Right? Just like you are. They're flesh and blood. Leaders make mistakes. And some leaders make very serious mistakes. You can go ask some of the past presidents some of the mistakes that they've made. You can ask some pastors mistakes that they've made. Leaders make mistakes. And when leaders make mistakes, they offend people. But the question is, does this give us a right to be offended or change churches just because a leader makes mistakes? Now, I can tell you that this Sunday school lesson is probably written in a place where there was an apostolic church on every street corner. Because here, to change churches, you probably got to drive an hour, you know, or go start your own church, which is why there's so many churches down south, is because that's what happened. There wasn't as many churches, so they just took a group and went and started their own apostolic church. When you get offended, does that give us a right to do that? That's the question. So let's look at the childhood of Samuel. God, not the devil, is the one that put the young man under the authority of Eli. And God, not the devil, put Eli in charge. These men were wicked, yet God had placed him in leadership. They took offerings by manipulation and force. Now I'm talking about Eli's 2 sons who were also in leadership, Hophni and Phinehas, and they committed fornication with the women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle. I guarantee you that if my leadership of this church was committing fornication and you knew I knew about it, and we were still like holding you up with a gun and taking your money as an offering, y'all would be like, "Woo! Lord, that is a devil place up in there." And you would have every right to. Let me just say that, okay? I understand the purpose of this, but I'm telling you from the perspective of the Scripture that we see that God had placed these people in place, and then he takes a young man who is impressionable, by the way. He's barely weaned from his mother, and she takes him to the temple and puts him in the charge of Eli. We're talking about a man, if you can imagine, who is serving as a minister who lived the kind of life that was so insensitive to God that while she's praying in the altar for God to give her a son, he thinks she's drunk. That woman must be drunk, because there's nobody that prays like that. And he goes over to see why she's so drunk in the temple, and, oh, you want a son? Oh, okay, well, God will give you a son. God still honored his word, even though he was evil. He was so compromising that he did nothing about his sons. Nothing. Whom he had appointed as leaders, who were committing fornication right in the middle of church. So to say that people had a right to be offended, they had a right to be offended. But did they go search for another temple? Telling others that what kind of wicked lifestyle the ministry was living. In the midst of this corruption, notice Samuel did in 1 Samuel 3:1. We'll throw that up there. 1 Samuel 3:1. And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before who? In his impressionable age, he was so sensitive that he wanted to do the right thing, regardless of what his leadership did. He still did the right thing. But corruption took its toll, and we go on to read, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days, and there was no open vision. So God didn't use Eli to preach. There was no open vision, but that didn't mean there weren't people that still loved the Lord in the ministry. You can't compare everybody to somebody who's offended you. Let me say that louder because I didn't get one amen. You cannot compare everybody to somebody who's offended you. You go work for a boss and you're like, well, I don't trust bosses because my other boss did such and such. Well, I don't trust pastors because I've had 2 pastors that's done such and such. Well, that's automatically wrong in any philosophy. Do you judge every woman by the one that's in the news right now? Stormy Daniels, I think is her name. No, I don't judge every woman by her, or Monica Lewinsky, or any of the other women. Just like I don't judge every man by Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. We can't do that. And so therefore I can't judge every pastor, every saint. I mean, I can flip the script because I can't judge every saint by saints that have attacked me. Because that's wrong. So offense goes so many different ways. The lamp of the Lord was going out, yet Eli did nothing. The light of the Lord is going dim in the church, and Eli does nothing. Yet did Samuel go look for another place to worship? Did he go to the elders and expose the wickedness of Eli and his sons? Did he form a committee to put Eli and his sons out? Did he try to take over the temple and make himself the priest? After all, God had spoken directly to him and not to Eli. No, he just continued to minister to the Lord. Now, I'm not teaching this lesson, guys. I didn't write these words, okay? I'll show you where I got the material. I didn't write these words. It's from a book that somebody developed into a Sunday school series that I decided to teach. So if anybody in here is thinking, oops, look at what pastor's talking about, somebody's trying to make, no, this is the Sunday school lesson. I'm reading it right out of the, not everything I'm saying I'm reading out of the book, but most of it is. God had placed Samuel there, and it was not his responsibility to correct the behavior of Eli and his sons. It was his job to make sure he lived right. So he was put under them not to judge them, but to serve them. That's interesting. He knew Eli was God's servant. He knew that God was capable of dealing with his own servants. And he knew it was not his place, so he did what God called him to do, and that was to serve. Children do not correct their fathers, but how many fathers have made mistakes? Right? Do you not correct your children just because you made a mistake? No. You go beat them so they don't act like you. I'm doing it so you don't act like. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. You can tell my kids aren't beat. Probably the snotty. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, look, pastor's kids go all the way back to Eli. I'm just kidding. Children do not correct their fathers, but it is the duty of the father to train and correct the children. We are to deal and to confront those whom God has given us to train. This is our responsibility. Those on our own level, we are to encourage and to exhort them as brothers. We do not condemn them and tear them down. We leave that to God. So I'm talking about our response to those who have authority over us. Samuel served God's appointed minister to the best of his ability without pressure to judge him or correct him. The only time that Samuel spoke a word of correction to Eli is because Eli begged him to tell him what God had told him. And even then it was not Samuel's word, it was God's word. Now, we can spend some time here of how God changes everything and corrects it, but we'll move on a little bit. We'll come back to that at another point. Today, people use church like cafeterias. They come in and pick and choose what they like, and they throw everything else away. If something is wrong in leadership, they leave. You know, I was when I went to my uncle's funeral a few weeks ago, I took some time to spend at a church to help us become better. And he took me to this place to eat, and the pastor did. And it was some of the best eggs and sausage that I've had, because we don't do sausage patties up here. And even if you do find a place that does sausage patties, they're awful. I mean, they're just awful. And sausage links are horrible. I mean, they're just awful. I hate sausage links. There's only a couple of places that I'll even eat sausage links, and that's because they must have taken a sausage patty and turned it into a link, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, it had these sausage patties that would melt in your mouth. They were awesome, and the eggs melted. And so I ate 2 eggs, a couple pieces of sausage patties, and no bread or anything. Just that's what I ate. It was so good. And I go to the restroom, and there's a cockroach in the restroom. Now, I didn't run out there in the middle of the cafeteria and say, "Everybody leave! They got cockroaches!" I mean, you know Waffle House has cockroaches, right? But we still want our all-star special. I mean, I'm quoting the comedian here, It's $5. Give it to me. I want it, I just didn't even tell the pastor about it. I told the bishop about it, and he started showing me the comedian about the Waffle House, and I thought that was just the funniest thing, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, why write an article? We know Waffle House is greasy. We still go there. I guarantee you the shooting that took place at the Waffle House, and I'm not trying to be awful about this whole thing, but somebody covered their eggs. I mean, it's at 3 o'clock in the morning. They probably don't even realize what's all going on here. They're out of their brain. I'm saying that not to be funny, but at the same point of understanding that there's just a time that we don't care what's going on around us. As long as what we are worried about doesn't get touched. But the church is not to be treated that way. You can't just come into the church and take what you like and leave. Maybe, you have to take everything that the church has. When I say this, I mean this in are you giving me a sign here, Jared? Okay. Because I noticed it wasn't on the other screens, but I'm looking at this and I'm like, am I supposed to say that? We do not use teleprompters here, but when something flashes up there, I'm like, what is that? Because it wasn't in my notes. I'm talking about minor things here. I'm not talking about major things. Like, guys, if I fall in sin, you have every right to choose what you need to do what you need to do, okay? I'm all about that. I'm not putting myself with Eli and saying, okay, now I'm fixing to go out here and start doing all kinds of evil stuff and you have to live with it. That's not what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say here is that sometimes we draw our lines over petty things, like how offerings are taken up. Notice we don't take up a lot of offerings around here. We have a box. But there are churches that take up 4 and 5 offerings a week. And folks, let me tell you, I'm fixing to have a board meeting tomorrow because our spending is out of control. Not because we can't, the things that it's been spent on is not what we're supposed to be spending on. There's just not enough money coming in to cover what all we're trying to accomplish. It's just not happening. We're trying to do things in some retrospect. Like we begged you for weeks to, I was looking at the report, we begged y'all for weeks to bring candy in for Easter. And we had to go out and spend $200 on candy because nobody bring candy in. Now, I'm not saying nobody. Let me say not nobody. There were people that did bring candy in. So let me say that clearly. But there wasn't enough candy. You understand what I'm saying? And so we had to pull out of the treasury to do that, which is fine. You give, so we do that. But don't fuss because somebody's asking you to donate candy or stuff like that. That's the petty things that I'm talking about that people tend to pick on churches about. Or the way the way the money is spent, We do little things like an Easter egg hunt that we've not done before, or VBS like we haven't done before years before. That takes money to do that stuff. Because I've had a lot of preachers through this first quarter because I've been sick. It takes money to do that. Because I want you to be fed properly. Because I wasn't able to do it. Does it make sense? You follow me? So it takes money to do those things. So when we see that, we can't get mad and say, you know what, well, just forget this and let me go find me another church. Because I promise you, you're going to find that there is no perfect church. The moment you walk in, it becomes imperfect. And that's not because Malachi just walked in. Dude's tall. Stand up, Malachi. What are you, 6'2" now? Huh? You don't know how tall you are? You ought to get that measured. I mean, really, seriously. I mean, go to the doctor. They can do that. I mean, I think it's unhealthy how tall you are. That's what I'm trying to say. Either the pastor is unapproachable or he's too familiar. I've heard it both ways. Not here. I mean, I have heard I'm unapproachable here, and I'm like, who in the world thinks I'm unapproachable? Like, I talk to everybody. Even people that have cussed me out, I talk to them. I talk to everybody. And there have been people here that's almost cussed me out, and I still talk to them. I'll be straight up honest. I've had them yell at me, scream at me, do all kinds of crazy things. And I still talk to them. Shake their hand, love them. How do you consider me unapproachable? Then I find people say, well, he's too familiar. You can't be both. And I'm not, listen, it's in the lesson. I didn't write this. I didn't highlight it either. I'm just telling you. And it's just about all things. And so we've talked about offense with your brothers. We've talked about offenses in marriages. Now we're talking about offenses in churches. Okay? Let's face it, Jesus was the only perfect pastor, and he still made people mad. Made them angry. They killed him because he called them vipers and serpents. You're like a whitened sepulcher on the outside, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. And you want to talk about an offering taker-upper. You want to know where the pastor Jesus stood? This is where Pastor Jesus stood. Right by the offering plate. Yeah, you're talking about intimidation. It made an old woman with just 2 mites who had nothing else get up and go give him the offering. Oh, Jesus is up there. I better go give these 2 mites. No, I don't think that was in her heart, but I think she gave it because she wanted to. But if I stood right here, yeah, that's not quite enough there, brother. Put another 0 behind that. Not after the period either. Y'all be like, I ain't going to that church no more. It's the truth. It is what it is. And he gets crucified over it. So I can imagine that pastors get crucified quite regularly across the dinner table because of little things that they do. So the question that I have is, and this is where we'll finish this lesson up next week because there's quite a bit more pages here. And some of it I struck out like it doesn't apply to us. Okay, so I just want you to understand that. Not that this does, but I'm just saying, just being careful here. We got to understand that just because you don't agree with your leadership does not give you the right to talk bad about your leadership. Now, I'm going to use an old Karate Kid proverbial word here. Balance is everything. This reflects not just how you do in church, but how you do in everything that you do. Just because you don't like what your boss does at work does not give you the right to go to the other employees and talk bad about your boss. You should treat your job, and you can hear this straight from the pulpit, as if it is your pastor or your church. And I promise you, God will honor you for doing that. Now, you have the right to quit your job, just like you have a right to go to a different church. But the question is, do we always need to make those choices? Sometimes God's wanting to see where our heart is. And we need to know whether it's a test or whether or not we need to bail. All right, we got about 10 minutes before we start the next session, so it gives you time to go freshen up, get you some water, or whatever you need to do. That means all board members, Brother David, Brother Dave Saylor, Brother